But first, in just over an hour, Treasurer Jim Chalmers will stand up in the Parliament and tell you how good he is, how good the government's done, and especially how much things have improved since Scott Morrison's time keeping the show on the road during the pandemic. Now, his big boast will be that debt is lower than it otherwise would be, and that's all down to his good management. As I said, fig jam Jim. But what he won't tell you is that thanks to Labor's profligate spending, with more than $60 billion in new vote-buying spending announced since Christmas, there's now debt and deficit stretching out as far as the eye can see. Now, what he also won't tell you is that any improvement in the budget bottom line is the result of good luck rather than good management. An entirely fortuitous $250 billion revenue windfall based on short-term boosts to commodity prices, largely the very same gas and coal exports that longer term Labor wants to ban. As the Financial Review reported this morning, based on the work of leading economist Chris Richardson, the Albanese government has announced just over $123 billion in new spending decisions, but only raised some $46 billion in revenue measures to pay for it. This means Labor's caused a $77 billion structural deterioration in the budget bottom line during its time in office. A $77 billion hit to the budget is a mark of shame, despite the sort of bravado you're likely to see from Chalmers, as I said, in a little over an hour's time. And in the end, experts to one side, you're the judge, aren't you? You're the judge on the government's time in office. And since he's been the Treasurer, are you better off or are you hurting? Because if his management has really been so good, as he'll try and sell you tonight, how come things in the real world have rarely been so bad? We've had 2 successive years of falling GDP per person, so a household recession, the longest household recession in 50 years. And there's been an 8% plus fall in real living standards, the worst in the developed world. Under Labor's watch, the RBA's raised rates 12 times, kept them on hold 14 times, and only once have they been lowered. The official cash rates moved from 0.35% to 4.35%, and now it's at 4.1%. Core inflation at 3.2%, well, that's higher than the United States, Japan, Germany, Canada, Spain, South Korea, Italy, France and Singapore. Under Labor, productivity's fallen 5.7 in their time in office. Insolvencies, well over 29,000 businesses have gone bust under Labor, and there's been a 3-fold increase in the number of manufacturers forced to close. In terms of spending, Labor's whacked an additional $347 billion on the nation's credit card since the last election. And that means, in practical terms, they're spending a hell of a lot more than they're raising. Now, this is not sustainable. Pandemic aside, spending is at a 40-year high, around 27% of GDP. In 2025-26, Commonwealth government spending is forecast to reach its highest level as a share of the economy outside the pandemic for 4 decades, almost 3 percentage points higher in GDP terms than 2022-23. But wasteful spending, well, that's in Labor's DNA, because most of its front bench ministers, Prime Minister included, well, they were all there in the days of the school hall rorts, the pink bats scandal, grocery watch, fuel watch, cash for clunkers and more. The PM, well, he spent over $500 million on the Voice referendum that divided Australia. $500,000 here on welcome to country ceremonies and $1 million there on rubbish like decolonising breastfeeding programs. Under Labor, the public service blown out by an extra 36,000 public servants, costing $6 billion a year. Indeed, over the past year, 3/4 of all jobs that have been created have effectively been taxpayer funded. There's been almost $7 billion spent on energy rebates that trim the symptom of high prices in power, but not the cause. And then there's been billions and billions for uncommercial projects like green hydrogen, and another $1 billion too for a quantum computer that's raised a lot of concerns about how the US firm got the work in the first place. Under Labor, personal income taxes paid are 22% higher. In 2023, Australians suffered the biggest increase in average tax rates of any citizen in the developed world. And Labor's completely abandoned the tax to GDP cap of 23.9%. In terms of using environmental policy to stop development, well, this government, they are gold medalists. Its nature positive plan's a good example. Industrial relations too, market interventions, mandatory climate disclosure laws, all the green and red tape that undermines mining. They ban too live sheep exports, and the list goes on. In terms of a Labor-made energy crisis, gas prices for consumers, they've increased by 34% under this government. Electricity too, it's up some 32% since the election, absent taxpayer-funded rebates. Under Labor, customers on electricity hardship payments, well, they're up 66% since the election, a growth of over 400 families a week on average, despite the government rebates. And it's set to get a whole lot worse, with Labor about to remove 90% of our 24/7 baseload power from the system over the next decade. On Chris Bowen's mad renewables-only East Coast energy plan, out to 2050, it'll cost 5 times more than the $122 billion he previously cited. And in terms of immigration, critical in a housing crisis, Labor's opened the migrant floodgates. A record 1 million migrants in 2 years, 70% more than in any previous 2-year period in our history. And so much for keeping their election policies last time.
Reducing power prices by $275.
Reducing power prices by $275.
By 2025, $275 a year.
$275 a year.
We'll get power prices down by $275 a year.
$275 for the average house, lower in 2025 than today.
And all, of course, this will get worse, really worse, if the government's re-elected, and especially if we get the likely Frankenstein option of an Albanese-Adam Band Labor-Green alliance. The Shadow Treasurer Angus Taylor is right to say that this is just a budget for the next 5 weeks, not the next 5 years. It's a budget for Labor's political survival, not a budget for Australia's future.
We need to see a restoration of our standard of living in this budget. Right now, the plan for the budget, or the last budget indeed, was that we wouldn't get back to the standard of living we had when we were in government, the coalition was in government, until 2030 or beyond. This will be a lost decade for Australian families.
Coming out of tonight and against the backdrop of a massive taxpayer-funded ad campaign to sell what will be a red ink, big spending budget to voters, the election, of course, will be called. So the opposition's challenge will be to create a real contest via Peter Dutton's Thursday night budget reply, without giving Labor too much ammunition for the inevitable scare campaign. Now, I expect Dutton to up the ante on Labor's emissions obsession with more details on how the opposition will keep reliable power in the system. I hope they put more flesh on the bones of their plans for much lower immigration, and perhaps have something to say about Dutton's commitment to uniting this country and ending the cultural wars that have demoralised so many Australians. Add in the strategic challenges we face with the rise of China and all the global uncertainty around Russia, Ukraine and the Middle East. And this really is a time to get the adults back in charge. And we must have a grown-up government running our defence strategy and our economy. We must have a leader with backbone, not a weak man who stands for nothing other than fighting the wars of university politics inside his hard left faction. Now that in the end is the choice that will be before Australian voters in a matter of weeks. And I just hope to God they vote in the national interest and are not bought off with the sugar hits of tonight's handouts.